There is a silent contract we make with our own image, an unspoken pact that the face staring back from the silvered glass will be our constant, our twin in time. We trust it to be a faithful record of the present moment. But my mirror, my beautiful, cursed mirror, broke that contract. It began to tell a story I hadn't lived yet, a horrifying biography written in wrinkles and scars across a face that was mine and yet not mine. It showed me the man I would become, and it was in a terrible hurry to get to the end. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. Leo Vance believed in perfection, and his life was a testament to that belief. His Hollywood apartment, a minimalist space of chrome, glass, and white leather, was less a home and more a gallery curated for a single exhibit, himself. Every morning was a ritual, an hour in his home gym, sculpting muscles with a discipline bordering on fanaticism, 30 minutes of vocal exercises, the rich baritone notes filling the sparse rooms. And finally, the most crucial part of his day, an audience with his reflection. His sanctuary was the bedroom, dominated by his most prized possession, a magnificent, full-length antique mirror. He'd found it in a dusty, forgotten corner of Pasadena, in a shop run by a strange, bird-like old man named Elias Thorne. The mirror was Venetian, its ebonized wood frame carved with intricate silver-leaf filigree that seemed to drink the light. The glass itself was thick, its depths holding a clarity that modern mirrors lacked. It wasn't just a tool, it was an affirmation. "To see yourself as you truly are," Elias had rasped, his eyes gleaming with a peculiar knowledge. For Leo, that meant seeing the flawless 26-year-old man who was on the precipice of stardom. Today was particularly important. He had a final callback for the role of a lifetime, a charismatic anti-hero in a major studio thriller that would make him a household name. He stood before the mirror, clad only in a towel, critically examining the canvas of his face. The jawline was sharp enough to cut glass. His eyes, the color of sea green, were clear and intense. His skin was taut, unblemished, a testament to a scrupulous diet and $1,000 worth of skincare products. He was a work of art, and he was his own most ardent admirer. He leaned closer, tracing the line of his cheekbone with a finger. That's when he saw it. A flicker. A trick of the light, perhaps. But for a split second, the reflection seemed to harbor a secret. A faint, impossibly fine line creased the corner of its left eye. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. He touched his own skin. It was perfectly smooth, as resilient as marble. He squinted back at the mirror. The line was gone. The reflection was once again his perfect, immaculate twin. He let out a tense breath, a small laugh escaping his lips. "Getting in your own head, Vance," he muttered. It had to be a flaw in the old silvering, a ghost in the glass. Antique mirrors were known for their distortions. Still, the image lingered in his mind, a tiny crack in the perfect facade of his confidence. He pushed the thought away, forcing a charismatic smile. The man in the mirror smiled back, a picture of youthful ambition. He began practicing his lines, his voice filling the room with a practiced confidence he didn't entirely feel. He spent a long time there, drawing strength from the flawless image, basking in the glow of his own youth. The mirror reflected everything he wanted to be, perfect, powerful, and eternal. He felt ready. He felt invincible. As he left the apartment, the mirror stood silent, holding his perfect image in its silver depths, waiting. The callback was a triumph. Leo had walked into the room and commanded it, feeling the director's and producer's eyes on him, not just as an actor, but as a star. The energy carried him home, a buzzing electric current of success that made him feel 10 feet tall. He strode into his bedroom, shedding his jacket, and went straight to the mirror, eager to see the victor in the glass. He grinned at his reflection, a wide, triumphant smile. The man in the mirror grinned back, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. And the line was back. This was no flicker. This was no trick of the light. Etched into the skin of the reflection, at the corner of the left eye, was a definite, undeniable wrinkle. It was a tiny thing, a crease no thicker than a spider's thread, but it was there. Leo's smile vanished. His heart began to hammer against his ribs, a frantic, panicked drumbeat. He lurched forward, his palms pressing against the cool glass, his face inches from his reflections. He frantically prodded the skin around his own eye. Smooth, flawless. He looked back at the glass. The wrinkle remained, a permanent fixture on a face that was supposed to be his. A wave of nausea and disbelief washed over him. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't real." He stumbled back, his mind racing. He snatched his phone from the nightstand, his hands trembling as he opened the camera app. He took a high-resolution photo of his own face, zooming in on the corner of his eye. Nothing. Then he aimed the phone at the mirror, snapping a picture of the reflection. His blood ran cold. There, on the screen of his phone, was the digital proof. The photo of his reflection clearly showed the tiny wrinkle. The discrepancy was real. A primal fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his denial. He fled the bedroom, his bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. He burst into the bathroom and flicked on the harsh vanity lights, staring at his face in the modern, frameless mirror above the sink. It was him, his face, young, unlined, exactly as it should be. He ran to the hallway, to a small decorative mirror hanging on the wall. Again, his reflection was normal. The anomaly, the horror, was contained to that one single piece of antique furniture. He returned to the bedroom slowly, cautiously, as if approaching a wild animal. He stood at a distance, his eyes locked on the face in the glass. He forced himself to be rational. It had to be a distortion, a bizarre, consistent warp in the old, hand-poured glass that created this specific optical illusion. It was the only explanation that didn't involve him losing his mind. But as he stared, trying to convince himself, he noticed something else. At the temple of his reflection's perfectly coiffed hair, nestled amongst the dark brown strands, was a single, silvery white hair. It was almost imperceptible, but under the focused intensity of his gaze, it glinted like a sliver of ice. He ran a hand through his own hair, his fingers finding nothing but thick, dark locks. The man in the mirror was not just wrinkling, he was going gray. The next week was a slow descent into a private hell. The aging process in the mirror was no longer a matter of single, isolated flaws. It was a creeping, insidious evolution. The fine line by the other Leo's eye had deepened, joined by a fan of smaller creases, the unmistakable signature of crow's feet. The single gray hair had multiplied, blossoming into a small but distinct patch of silver at his temple, a stark contrast to the dark brown hair surrounding it. The changes were subtle enough that, for moments at a time, Leo could almost convince himself it was stress, a trick of his overworked imagination. But the proof was always there, waiting for him in the silvered glass. The reflection's posture seemed different, too. Where Leo stood straight, a posture drilled into him by years of training, the other Leo had a slight slump in his shoulders, a weariness that seemed to emanate from his very bones. He was losing sleep, his focus was shot. During a meeting with his agent, Chloe Miller, he couldn't stop himself from blurting it out. They were discussing the contract for the thriller, the culmination of his life's work, but all he could think about was the man in his mirror. "There's something wrong with my mirror," he said, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. It's making me look old." Chloe, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had seen every form of actor neurosis imaginable, simply raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She took a sip of her iced latte. "Leo, honey, you look amazing. You look like the star they're about to pay $800,000 for his first major role. Whatever you're seeing, it's not real." "It is real," he insisted, his voice rising. "There are wrinkles, gray hairs. I took pictures, Chloe." "Stop," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "You're projecting. This is the biggest moment of your career. You're terrified of failing, of getting old and losing your looks before you even make it. It's a classic Hollywood anxiety. You're projecting your fear onto a piece of furniture. Go home, get some sleep, and for God's sake, focus on the final screen test. Her dismissal stung, but it also planted a new seed of horror in his mind. What if she was right in a way? What if his own fears were somehow causing this? This led him to a terrifying new discovery, a pattern, a feedback loop. The day before his final screen test, he stood before the mirror, needing a boost of confidence. He gave himself a long, impassioned pep talk, staring deep into the reflection's eyes, admiring the handsome face he was so desperate to preserve. He felt better afterward, his vanity a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. The next morning, the price for that moment of self-admiration became horrifyingly clear. A new, distinct line had been etched across his reflection's forehead. It was as if his own vanity, his desperate focus on his youthful image, was the very thing fueling the reflection's accelerated decay. The more time he spent looking, whether in admiration or in horror, the faster the man in the mirror withered. The glass wasn't just showing him a monster, it was feeding off his own ego to create it. The reflection was no longer just an older version of Leo. It was becoming someone else, a man shaped by a different, harder life. The face in the glass, now visibly in its late 30s, was still recognizably his, but it was leaner. The youthful roundness of his cheeks replaced by a gaunt tension. The eyes, though still his sea green, carried a profound sadness, a deep-seated regret that Leo couldn't comprehend. This wasn't just aging, this was weathering. This was the face of a man who had seen dreams die. Panic gave way to a desperate, clawing need for answers. He had to find Elias Thorne. He drove to the address in Pasadena, his heart pounding with the mixture of hope and dread, only to find the antique shop gone. In its place was a sterile, soulless yoga studio. A cold dread washed over him. He spent the next 2 days making frantic calls, scouring online records and chasing dead ends, until a city registrar, taking pity on his haggard appearance, found a forwarding address. It wasn't a home. It was a quiet, unassuming retirement facility in the valley. Leo found Elias in a sun-drenched room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and old paper. The once spry, bird-like man was now frail, lost in the folds of a large armchair, a wool blanket draped over his thin legs. His eyes, however, were still sharp, and they lit up with a spark of recognition as Leo approached. "Ah," Elias rasped, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "The actor. And the mirror. I wondered when you might come." "What is it?" Leo demanded, his voice cracking. "What did you sell me? Is it haunted?" Elias gave a weak, wheezing chuckle. "Haunted? No, my boy. Nothing so crude as a ghost. What it is much more personal." He beckoned Leo closer. "Some call it a vanity glass. I prefer the term echo mirror. It's not reflecting you as you are now. It is reflecting a potential future. Your future." Leo stared, uncomprehending. "My future? Why is it aging so fast?" "Because you're feeding it," Elias explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The mirror is a temporal anomaly, you see. Its timeline is flexible. The future it shows is directly influenced by the time and, more importantly, the emotional energy its owner invests in looking at it. Vanity, fear, obsession. The more you stare, the more of your own present you pour into it. You are literally giving it your time, and in return, it speeds down your timeline, showing you the very decay your vanity is so desperate to prevent. It is a cruel paradox, is it not? The more you worry about aging, the faster it shows you your end. Leo felt the floor drop out from beneath him. It wasn't a haunting. It was a law of physics, twisted and malevolent. He wasn't being haunted by a spirit, he was being haunted by his own future. A future he was actively, horrifyingly accelerating with every glance. Elias's words echoed in Leo's mind, turning his apartment from a sanctuary into a torture chamber. He now understood the mirror's terrible nature, but that knowledge only deepened the horror. The reflection, now firmly in its 40s, began to tell a more detailed story of the life Leo hadn't lived. One morning, a faint, silvery scar appeared on its left eyebrow, the kind one gets from a fall or a fight. A few days later, its hands, which Leo saw when the reflection gestured in mimicry of his own movements, looked different. They were calloused and worn, the nails short and uneven, the hands of a man who worked with them for a living, not an actor who moisturized them nightly. This was the most terrifying part. The mirror wasn't showing him the future of a successful, famous Leo Vance. It was showing him the future of a man broken by the very industry he was trying to conquer. The tired eyes, the scarred brow, the worn hands, they spoke of failure, of struggle, of a life that had veered violently off the golden path he was currently on. Leo's own life began to unravel. The fear of the mirror became a fear of all reflective surfaces. He covered the antique mirror with a heavy blanket, but his reflection still lurked in the black screen of his television, in the kitchen window at night, in the polished chrome of his refrigerator. He became a ghost in his own home, moving through rooms with his head down, avoiding his own gaze. His confidence, once his greatest asset, evaporated. His final screen test was a disaster. The lines he knew by heart felt alien in his mouth. He was stilted, fearful, his eyes darting around as if expecting to see a wizened version of himself in the camera lens. The director's polite dismissal felt like a death sentence. The connection to the man in the mirror was growing stronger, more sinister. He began to experience sympathetic pains. He would wake up with a phantom ache in his lower back, mirroring the tired posture of his reflection. Sometimes, a wave of profound, inexplicable regret would wash over him, an emotional echo from a future he hadn't earned. He was resonating with the sad, failed man in the mirror, their two timelines bleeding into one another. He wasn't just watching his future decay, he was feeling it, a slow, agonizing process of unbecoming. The man he was terrified of in the glass was slowly, surely claiming him from the inside out. The blanket couldn't stay on the mirror forever. A morbid, self-destructive curiosity, a need to see the end of the story, began to gnaw at Leo. He was sabotaging his present because he was terrified of a future he was creating. The logic was twisted, but the compulsion was overwhelming. One night, fueled by whiskey and despair, he tore the blanket from the mirror. He pulled up a chair, sat down, and decided he would not look away. He would face the inevitable. He would watch the whole show. The effect was catastrophic. With his undivided, obsessive attention pouring into the glass, the temporal feedback loop went into overdrive. He watched in horrified, fast-forwarded stillness as the reflection aged through its 40s, then its 50s, then its 60s, all in the span of a single night. It was a horrifying, silent film of his own decay. The crow's feet deepened into cavernous trenches. Age spots bloomed like dark lichen on the papery skin. The hair thinned like melting snow before turning completely white and receding from the scalp. The handsome jawline dissolved into the soft, sagging flesh of jowls. The eyes, once so bright, grew cloudy with cataracts. He saw his own face, the face he had worshipped, crumble into ruin. The reflection was now an old, frail man, well into his 80s. It sat in a chair that mirrored Leo's, its movements slow and pained. It looked back at Leo, and for the first time, there was no mimicry. There was a moment of lucidity, of profound and heartbreaking pity. The old man in the glass looked at the young, terrified man staring back, and a flicker of understanding crossed his ravaged features. Slowly, painfully, the reflection raised a shaky, wrinkled hand. Its finger trembled as it pointed, not at Leo, but past him, at something in the reflected room. Leo, mesmerized by the horror, couldn't tear his eyes away. He watched the trembling finger point towards his desk. His desk, which was covered in scripts, headshots, and a small, gleaming trophy from an independent film festival he'd won years ago. The meaning struck Leo with the force of a physical blow. The reflection wasn't a monster. It wasn't a curse. It was a warning. It was a warning. It was the ghost of Christmas future. It was showing him the ultimate, lonely, and regretful end of a life spent solely in the pursuit of fame, a life defined by the worship of his own fleeting image. The scars, the calloused hands, the deep, abiding sadness, they weren't signs of a failed acting career. They were the price of an empty life, one where he had achieved his goals but lost his soul. The final transformation began as dawn broke, painting the sky in pale shades of gray. The reflection, already ancient, began to fade. The bedroom and the mirror dissolved, replaced by a stark, white, clinical room. The old man was no longer in a chair, but was now lying in a hospital bed, a thin sheet pulled up to his skeletal chest. The air in Leo's own room grew cold, and he could almost hear the faint, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor that wasn't there. He was watching his own death. The reflection's breaths were shallow, rattling things. Leo knew, with an instinct that transcended logic, that when his reflection died, something terrible would happen to him. Would he drop dead on the spot? Or would he simply become what the reflection was, an empty vessel of regret, his youth a hollow shell? He had a choice. He could grab the chair he was sitting on and shatter the mirror, an act of final, violent denial. He could run, flee the apartment and the city, and spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder, never knowing the outcome. Or he could stay, face the end, and choose to change his own path. The climax was not an act of violence, but one of profound, painful self-rejection. Leo stood up and walked to the mirror, standing before his dying self. He was no longer watching with vanity or even fear. He was watching with a strange, sorrowful acceptance and a newfound, desperate resolve. He spoke to the dying man, his voice quiet but steady in the silent room. "Thank you," he said, his own words feeling strange and powerful. "Thank you for the warning." He took a deep breath, the next words feeling like a vow, an incantation to break the spell. "But that's not me. That's not my life." He turned away from the mirror, leaving the old man to his fate. He walked to his desk, to the altar of his own ambition. He gathered up the glossy headshots, the scripts marked with his hopeful notes, the gleaming trophy. He walked back to the mirror. The old man in the hospital bed was gone. The reflection was just an empty, waiting room. He held up a script to the glass. For a terrifying second, in the reflection of the script's glossy cover, he saw not the room, but his own young, terrified face. He dropped it as if it were on fire. Then he picked up a framed photo from his nightstand, one he hadn't truly looked at in years. A picture of him with his parents and younger sister, all of them laughing on a beach vacation. He held the photo up to the mirror. The glass reflected the happy image, clear and true. In that moment, he was choosing a different future, a different definition of himself, one not measured in fame or flawlessness, but in connection and love. When he lowered the photo, he dared to look into the mirror again. He held his breath. Staring back at him was him, just him. Leo Vance, 26 years old, his face pale and tear-streaked, but young, unlined. The temporal link, its fuel of vanity and ambitious fear now cut off, had been severed. The echo had faded. The mirror was just a mirror again. The silence in the room was no longer menacing. It was peaceful. The next day, Leo called Chloe. He told her he was turning down the role. She was speechless, then furious, but he was calm. He explained he was taking a break, leaving LA for a while to go home and reconnect with his family. He was choosing a different life, one not defined by a reflection in a camera lens or a silvered piece of glass. A week later, men from an auction house came to collect the mirror. "It's a beautiful piece," Leo told them, staying in the other room, unable to look directly at it. "But the glass is a little warped, plays tricks on the eyes." He paused, then added, "It's not for the vain." The final scene unfolds months later. Leo is living a simpler life in a small coastal town. He's teaching an acting class to a group of rambunctious teenagers at the local community center, finding a joy in the craft itself, not the image it could bring him. He looks healthier, happier. The haunted look is gone from his eyes. One afternoon, he's walking down the town's main street past a row of quaint shops. In the window of a high-end antique store, he sees it, his old mirror, polished and gleaming, for sale at an exorbitant price. He pauses on the sidewalk, his heart giving a single, hard thump. He looks at his reflection in the shop window. It's just him, a man in his late 20s with a genuine, easy smile touching his lips. He watches for a moment, then turns and walks on, leaving the past behind him. But the camera lingers on the mirror. A young woman, beautiful and poised, with the unmistakable fire of ambition in her eyes, stops in front of the window. She catches her reflection in the beautiful, antique glass. She smiles, admiring the perfect line of her jaw, the flawless complexion. She leans a little closer, lost in her own perfect image. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.